Greetings, all my lovelies. It's like, let me not do my best Dave Chappelle doing Rick James. Hey, y'all, welcome to the Tuesday edition of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Very excited that you are here to join us for a very interesting and important conversation. Y'all, they are trying to not only reopen the economy as COVID continues to rage, kill, and mutate, but they are also putting the press on reopening schools, right? All that bullshit about kids don't catch COVID, bullshit. There are kids that have not only caught COVID, but these kids have died from COVID. And of course, we know children can transmit the disease to their teachers, to their parents, to their grandparents. So why the fuck are they trying to reopen schools? And when I say they, I mean Democratic governors, I mean Republican governors, and I mean President Joe Biden. That's y'all's boy. Joe Biden is trying to reopen the schools. Before we get into all the events around that, we have a very quick word from one of our favorite professors. Let's take a listen.
Much of what has been said about communism in this country is simply not true. The reason I am a communist is because I feel that only through a total revolution, which is going to overthrow the capitalist control of the economy, which will seize the wealth from all of the giant corporations that exploit and control the lives of all working people, but particularly black people. And see, I feel that the reason why racism is so blatant and has been a part of the history of black people from the time we were first kidnapped from the shores of Africa is because it has helped those capitalists gain more and more profit. And if you look at any factory, any plant, who does the worst jobs? Who gets paid the smallest salaries? It's black people. So racism serves as a buttress, as a justification for super exploitation. And I feel that if we're going to talk about the total liberation of black people, we first have to liberate ourselves from the material conditions of our oppression. And the material conditions of our oppression are no jobs, or bad jobs, unemployment, bad housing, bad medical care, and all of the kinds of things that will be eradicated under socialism.
Of course, that was Dr. Angela Davis, and she is celebrating her 77th birthday today. So we want to wish Dr. Angela Davis a very special birthday. You guys, we are so fortunate that Angela Davis is still around talking her shit and educating all of us about that something better is possible. And her life is also a brilliant example of the kind of sacrifice that freedom fighters have to endure. I mean, Angela Davis do some shit. Y'all seen that famous poster of Angela on the FBI? Y'all, she was one of FBI's most wanted, and Angela Davis is still here with us today to tell the story. So please send Dr. Davis her flowers today. Shout out to all the Aquariuses. All right, gang. Let's hop right into this conversation about what's going on with the teachers, how teachers are pushing back against political pressure from, let's start in Chicago, shall we? Democratic Mayor Lori Lightfoot mandated that teachers report to in-person learning. They were trying to do some sort of hybrid learning in the city of Chicago. Mind you, not many improvements have been made on city schools in Chicago in terms of improving ventilation, HVAC. So, for example, we all know that it's probably in the teens temperature-wise in Chicago. What the CPS guidelines for public school teachers, if they are doing in-person learning, is to open the windows in order to facilitate better air circulation and ventilation to prevent the spread of COVID. Do you know how fucking cold it is in Chicago in January? Does that sound like a practical thing to leave the windows open just for the sake of having bodies in the seats? Absolutely not. So the Chicago Teachers Union on Monday, they were ordered, or teachers rather, were ordered to report for in-person learning. The Chicago Teachers Union, their members voted, they said, fuck that shit. Okay, Tunde, let me get what did I send you? B1. Let's take a look at B1 real quick, gang. Because what a lot of these politicians are trying to tell teachers and tell us at large is that kids don't transmit COVID. Like that it's totally cool to send the kids into school because you know what? Kids don't catch COVID, which is some bullshit. Check out this tweet from the Chicago Teachers Union. It says, can you make it a little bigger for your auntie Tunde? Come on, man. It says maybe Mayor Lori Lightfoot said yesterday that in-person instruction for pre-K classrooms has been without incident since it began 2 weeks ago, but CPS itself has confirmed COVID cases in some schools since January 11th, with teachers and staff reporting close to 60. Now, these are just pre-K classrooms reporting, right? So let Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Larry Hogan and Lori Lightfoot tell it that the kids can't transmit COVID. Bullshit. I want us to also take a look at this video put out by the Chicago Teachers Union, basically explaining the fears and reservations justifiably that they have about returning to the classroom. B5, Brother Tunde.
All over the country, COVID-19 has changed the way we live, the way we work, and the way we learn. The pandemic has forced a reckoning for educators and families across Chicago, and through tragedy and triumph, made us fight for our lives as well as our school communities.
The Latinx community accounts for 45% of COVID-19 cases, while the Black community makes up a whopping 43% of the virus's deaths.
It's clear that safety must be paramount in everything we do. From an arbitrator's ruling that school buildings remain unsafe, to two of the city's largest charter networks announcing remote learning plans. Mayor Lori Lightfoot and her hand-picked Board of Education must work with students, parents, and educators
Thank you, Mayor.
to ensure safety for everyone in every building.
Question, is there a number of educator or student deaths that we are willing to accept in order to have in-person school?
How much more heartbreak do we have to endure before they do the right thing and provide a clear plan for safety that includes investment in the proper ventilation, contact tracing, and routine, comprehensive COVID-19 testing in our schools? We all want students back in their classrooms, but with COVID still on the rise, now is the time to listen to those who are risking the most and invest in making our buildings safe.
You know, in cities across the country where there are predominantly Black and Brown students, there has been systemic disinvestment in improving and maintaining the buildings. A lot of schools in urban areas, I would imagine even in rural and suburban areas, well, maybe not suburban areas, but for example, like there's no AC in some Baltimore schools. There's no heat in some schools in Baltimore City. I would imagine Chicago public schools are enduring the same thing. I want us to take a look real quick at those graphics that I just sent you, Brother Tunde. Let's take a look at B3, just to give you an idea of how COVID is raging throughout Chicago. I believe as of yesterday, they were experiencing a positivity rate of close to 8%. Okay. Now, Shyvax bot. This is a Twitter account that's being operated, I believe, by the Southside Weekly, which is an alternative newspaper publication in Chicago. And what this says, Chicago is currently reporting 32,089 people fully vaccinated. That is only 1.2% of the population. Now, take a look at these graphics. I hope you're able to discern what these say and rather what they look like. So who is dying? On the left, look at all that red and deep crimson. That is Southside Chicago right there, South and West, okay? Now, if you look to the right, who has been vaccinated? What is that? That's all, pardon me. Yes, who's vaccinated? That's right. Look at that. All that is North Side, Lakeshore area. You feel me? Wrigleyville. all the wealthy, mostly white areas in Chicago are receiving the bulk of the vaccinations, while the mostly Black and Brown communities on Chicago's South and West Side are the ones experiencing the highest number of COVID deaths. I also wanted us to take a quick look. What was it, Brother Tunde? Was it B4, please? B4. Let me take a look at that. because in addition to the bold actions taken by the Chicago Teachers Union, the kids are getting involved. I am so in awe and inspired at Chicago's protest scene, man, because they got the kids out there. There is a Twitter account run by students. It's called the Chicago Students Pandemic Response. Okay, and these are the demands of the children. Number one, Chicago public school students and teachers should remain in remote learning until a safe reopen can be provided. Every CPS student should receive a pass for the 2021 school year. Tell them, kids, out of the mouths of babes. And number three, more available and effective mental health resources available for CPS students, teachers, and staff. Obviously, we are in a pandemic, guys. We are experiencing record levels of mass death in this country. And so many of our elected officials and our fellow countrymen are just telling us to shake the shit off. One more graphic, and then we're going to go to Larry Hogan here, Mr. Tunde. So let's go to B2, because please don't think that Lori Lightfoot was okay with her teachers not showing up for in-person learning as directed. Also, just FYI, for the past couple of weeks, Chicago teachers have been staging a bit of a protest. They have been teaching outside. They have been doing their instruction outdoors, sitting outside of the class, outside of the school building. Some of them have even been sitting inside of their cars, okay, and giving in-person instruction. They pull up to the school, link up to the Wi-Fi, and then they start teaching from their laptops, from their vehicles. It is an amazing feat of dedication to these kids. Please, please, please. We got to send our love to the teachers. So in anticipation that some teachers will possibly be disciplined, a GoFundMe account has been created for teachers. And so far they've raised just shy of $40,000 in anticipation, again, because Lori Lightfoot said if the teachers don't show up, they do not get paid. I would imagine similar situations are occurring where you live. If you are watching us from Los Estados Unidos, drop a comment in the chat. Genevieve will get it to me. What is the reopen situation as it pertains to public schools where you live? Are your leaders competent? Do they give a fuck if people live or die? Tell me. I need to know who are the compassionate political leaders out here, because Republicans and Democrats alike are out here looking like some whole shit. Have y'all seen what's going on in California? Yes, they get Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor, supposed liberal, has reauthorized portions of the state to reopen, right? Like restaurants get to reopen back again at 25%. Mind you, 5,000 people in less than a month died of COVID in Los Angeles County. The pandemic is raging, 1 out of 3. And California got its own super strain, not of weed, but of COVID. So we are not close to reopening, folks. But in order for the capitalist machine to keep eating, somebody got to watch them kids so mom and dad can get their asses out there and make minimum wage or do their essential services. In the state of Maryland, our COVID rates have been increasing. We've been on a steady rise for about the past 3 or 4 months. And it's really indicative of the entire region. DC has seen an increase. Virginia is fucking flaming right now. I think Virginia's positivity rate was up there, like 12, 13%, something crazy. But this week, well, within the past week, maybe about 3 or 4 days ago, Governor Larry Hogan, Republican, right? Anyway, he gave a press conference. And I want y'all to just listen and pay attention to what Larry Hogan said, to what he doubled down on. It's stunning. Tunde, can we listen to our dickhead governor, Larry Hogan, please?
Dr. Salmon and the State Board of Education have continued to consult with superintendents, educators, parents, health officials, and medical experts. And a growing consensus has emerged, both here in Maryland and across the country, that there is no public health reason for county school boards to keep students out of schools. Now, let me say that again. There is no public health reason for school boards to be keeping students out of schools. None. This really isn't controversial. The science is clear. Nearly everyone wants to get our kids back into school. And this is a top priority that has strong and broad bipartisan support. President Biden has made the reopening of schools one of his top priorities for his first 100 days in office. And today he signed an executive order supporting the safe reopening of schools.
So look at that. Bipartisan agreement on how to best kill more Americans. That was Maryland Governor Larry Hogan seemingly wrapping his arm around the newly elected president, Joe Biden, like, yup, see, we all want y'all to go out there and die. We're going to send your kids out to school. They're going to bring you back to COVID. And then it's curtains. Mind you, Joe Biden doesn't seem to have nothing else better to do, right? Joe Biden is going to the bagel shop and showing y'all his dogs on the White House and putting Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill. Nigga, where's them $2,000 checks at, Joe Biden? Where's my stimmy? Give me my stimmy. But let me get back to the topic at hand. Gang, earlier today, I had the opportunity to speak with Corey Gaber. Now, Corey is a founding member, one of the founding members, mind you, of the Baltimore movement of rank and file educators. He's also a VP on the Baltimore Teachers Union Executive Board. So there's a lot of discussion in Maryland. And I know y'all might be sick about hearing about Maryland, but I'm here to tell y'all, let me tell you about Maryland real quick, y'all, because Maryland is one of those so-called progressive bastions of blue or whatever. Y'all, they be on some bullshit, okay? Regardless of who is in the governor's mansion in Annapolis, Baltimore City is going to get the short end of the stick. If it's a Republican in office, whether or a Democrat in office, usually Black people in the state of Maryland get the short end of the stick somehow, some way. So I just want to assure y'all that even though this state is reliably blue, they are also reliably on some bullshit. But let me digress. I spoke with Corey earlier today. There is a very important meeting of the Baltimore City School Board happening tonight. So that's why he wasn't able to join us live. But we had a really interesting conversation about teachers, about what their options are in terms of labor organizing, whether or not teachers can actually strike. Spoiler alert, in the state of Maryland, it is illegal for teachers to strike. It was unbelievable when Corey told me this. So actually, we're going to toss right to that interview. I spoke with Corey Gaber earlier today about what teachers and educators are facing as they are receiving increasing political pressure to reopen schools, to reestablish in-person learning. So I'd like to welcome Corey Gaber to Burn It Down with Kim Brown.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Corey, let's sort of start with where we are, right? So here we are, February almost, 2021. We've been dealing with the pandemic 12 months, but schools have relatively been closed for the past 10, 11 months. And at the point in time in 2020, when public schools closed, we are worse now in the pandemic in terms of number of infections, clearly in terms of number of people who have died from the virus than we were 12 months ago. And a year ago, it was sort of a consensus that, yes, we should totally close schools because we don't fully understand the nature of this virus. It's a pandemic. It's very deadly. But even though we seem to understand more scientifically about the virus, what is coming out of the messaging from public health officials is not jiving well with what politicians are insisting upon reopening schools. So let's start there. What is Baltimore City School Board trying to do with Baltimore City Public Schools?
Yeah, so, first off, it's worth mentioning that the Baltimore City School Board is one of, if not the only school boards in the state of Maryland that has not taken a vote on the matter of reopening. So we don't actually know exactly where they stand. The CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools has put forth a plan to expand in-person learning programming starting as soon as the beginning of February, where educators in certain grades, kindergarten through fifth grade and 9th and 12th grade, would start to be mandated back in buildings based on a sort of school choice portfolio market-based model that says we have a portfolio of schools, Each parent will get to say whether they want their student to be learning in person or continuing to learn virtually, which means every single school will have a different ratio of students in person versus at home. And then the district will mandate those staff necessary to be back into the school buildings to meet the demand of the in-person learners that parents have chosen. So that's what has been proposed by the district. And educators and school staff that make our buildings work are pretty overwhelmingly opposed to the plan for a variety of reasons, which I can start to get into now, or if you want me to wait till later to jump into the specifics.
No, get right into it. Why are teachers and educators opposed to this proposed plan by Baltimore City School Board?
It's not safe, period. And like, how do you define what is safe and when is it safe to get back into schools? Well, if you just look at the state's own guidance that they have put forth saying these are the public health metrics that we will use to decide when to do school reopening, they look at two things primarily: the positivity rate, the case rate per 100,000 people over the past week. So let's look at Baltimore City. According to their own decision-making tree, if you are above 5% positivity rate, you go into one category. Guess what? We're over 5%. And then you look at the case rate. It says if you are at 15 cases or above per 100,000 people in the city over the past week, you should have quote unquote limited or no in-person programming. We are at 35 to 40, depending on the day. So more than double, almost triple the boundary that they have set forth as when we should have limited or no in-person programming. So now that the new variant is starting to attack Maryland and Baltimore City, where there are confirmed cases, even though the public health data says it is not yet safe to do so by the state's own standards, Baltimore City Public Schools is saying, let's move forward anyway. And so it's upsetting to educators on a variety of levels. One, we are literally jeopardizing not just our lives, but the lives of our students and their family members if we expand in-person learning in the middle of the pandemic when the public health metrics say it's not safe to do so. But it's also even more complicated in Baltimore City because obviously we have a long history of redlining, which means that you have what's called in Baltimore the black butterfly, where you have the intentionally segregated districts, the white L of moneyed white folks as a result of redlining policies and all sorts of other banking and housing policies over the years that are, completely racist, provable, and connected to federal, state, and local government policies. And if you look at the rates in the black butterfly compared to the white L, you'll notice, like with many other public health metrics, that you're going to have a higher positivity rate, you're going to have a higher case rate, you're going to have more folks who are vulnerable to both getting the virus and then suffering worse health outcomes when you get the virus. Because guess what? The Black families that are primarily the families that Baltimore City Public Schools serve in the black butterfly also have a higher percentage of people living in homes, more people in the homes, intergenerational homes, higher percentage of people who are themselves essential workers in the homes, which means they are more exposed and vulnerable to this virus. And you put all those pieces together and then you reopen schools as well, you are basically choosing to expand this pandemic and you are choosing unnecessary death that could be avoided. So that is deeply upsetting. People are filing for accommodations if they have somebody with extremely deep, high risks in their own home, children of theirs with super special needs, grandparents who they're taking care of. All those accommodations are being denied. Baltimore City Public Schools has an explicit policy that says we will not grant you any accommodations if you have vulnerable people in that household. That is not a legitimate reason for us to grant you an accommodation. And it's just, it's inhuman. It's inhuman. And that's on top of everything I just said, in Baltimore City, again, because we're a portfolio and choice district, that means that students just don't go to their neighborhood school, right? There's an entire school choice process. We have the language and logic of the market that have invaded our schools now. And so students don't just go walk 2 blocks to their school. Most of them have to take public transportation, many stops across the city, taking more than an hour in order to get to their school building in the first place, which means they are now getting exposed to all sorts of folks on the bus where, guess what? You're not going to be able to enforce social distancing and mask wearing. If any of your listeners have been on Baltimore City's public transportation, a lot of people work hard and do a great job, but social distancing and mask wearing. That is not happening with fidelity. So now you have students that have violated all the cohort integrity that they're trying to set up, and they're coming into buildings, and it's just going to be a mess. It's a bad plan. It's an unsafe plan, and it will literally cost people's lives.
You know, and a lot of people would argue that Baltimore City public schools, or at least some of them, are inherently dangerous even pre-pandemic. And I'm talking about from simply a maintenance perspective. Every single summer and winter, there were stories of city schools being closed because they lacked proper air conditioning or they lacked proper heating, where students were unable to drink out of water fountains because of the lead contamination in the water. So everything that people would hopefully have to, or students would have to keep them safe inside the school building, let's say a HEPA filter and good ventilation and proper air circulation and clean water. I mean, those things are literally inaccessible to them. To your knowledge, has Baltimore City Schools taken any efforts to improve the infrastructure of some of these schools in the schools that they are proposing hybrid in-person learning?
Yeah, great point. And I'm glad you raised this issue because I forgot to mention it in my initial diatribe. But, you know, when it comes to school facilities, right, they certainly know it's a problem. Even before the pandemic, as you mentioned, we had a $3 billion, billion with a B, backlog of essential maintenance work that needed to be done in buildings that Baltimore City Public Schools could not do because they literally lacked the resources to do the work that they know needed to be done. Again, that is not the fault of current city schools administration. They inherited, decades of racist underfunding. But we do have to acknowledge the reality of, like you said, we literally can't drink the water in our schools. We do not have functioning HVAC systems. So what has city schools done? Well, they have made investments to try to get new MERV 13 filters, new air purifiers into these spaces to support with safer learning conditions. But, and here's some of the big problems, according to their own data, 74% of their buildings have not completed the ventilation upgrade work. And yet, despite that, they have still been holding in-person programming in school buildings where the ventilation work has not yet been completed. So that does not give folks a lot of trust and faith that these will be safe buildings, given the inherited racist history that we have, and given that city schools' current administration has already been willing to put people into buildings where the ventilation work has not been completed. And by the way, even if you have a good filter in there, that doesn't mean you're getting the proper rate of air circulation, air exchange that are measured in other places. And so if I've got a great filter, but the air is not flowing, don't have a good air exchange, and you can't open the windows in most Baltimore City public school buildings, it's still not safe even when you finish that. So, you know, one of the big demands that teachers have been saying to Baltimore City public schools is, one, you know, the public health data has got to be right. But two, you have to finish the ventilation work before you force people back in. Otherwise, it is not safe.
Corey, earlier this week, or really on the 21st of January, Governor Larry Hogan, in his daily press briefings about the COVID-19 pandemic in the state of Maryland, said, quote, "There is no public health reason for county school boards to be keeping students out of school. None," end quote. Now, he said county, but we know he meant city too. What is your reaction, and what has been the reaction of other educators hearing the governor, who claimed that the state of Maryland would be following the science on how to safely reopen, understanding that this messaging coming out of Annapolis is in direct contrast to what public health officials are saying constitutes a safe reopening. What's your reaction to Governor Hogan, and what's been the reaction of your fellow members?
It's laughable. He has a very tenuous relationship with the truth. As we said earlier, I already named two public health metrics: the positivity rate, the case rate per 100K. Those are the metrics we didn't come up with. The state put forward in their own guidance. We are far beyond the threshold that they put forward. So when you say there's no reason, I'm literally pointing to two reasons based on your own data and your own guidance that you sent out. And that doesn't include other alarming public health measures, like, for example, the CDC, their primary measure they put forward when deciding when to reopen in-person learning program is they have another metric where they look at the case rate for 200K over the past couple of weeks. And then they have different categories from safest to moderate risk of introduction and transmission to the highest risk category. To get into that highest risk category, you got to be above 200. Baltimore City is at 550. Again, almost triple the threshold to get into the highest risk category. We are so far beyond what is safe. Again, according to the science, according to the public health metrics that the CDC and the state themselves have put forward, that it's absurd for the governor to make that claim, and it's clearly about something else. It's also laughable to our members to hear that from the governor, considering this is the same man who vetoed the blueprint bill for Maryland's future that would have increased investments into public schools, and by association, the Built to Learn Act that would invest in improving our schools' infrastructure. Again, these are the things you need to actually reopen schools safely. So if you are actually committed to reopening schools safely, maybe you should not veto the funding that would have made school buildings safe in the first place.
And it's also laughable for Larry Hogan, a two-time cancer survivor, to have the audacity to tell people, teachers, educators, school nurses, school custodians, school administrators that school is totally safe to open. And I'm like, okay, Larry Hogan, then why don't you go stand in the lobby and greet the kids as they are welcome back to school? And it's like, otherwise, shut your mouth. But I want to talk about the vaccination rollout, because that has gone almost, I want to say disastrous, because, and I'm not exactly sure about the situation in Baltimore City, so I'm counting on you to enlighten me, but I live in Prince George's County, where there are long lines to get vaccinated. State websites are directing residents who live outside of my county to come into our county to take our vaccinations away from vulnerable groups like Prince George's County seniors in favor of Montgomery County residents, for example. And Montgomery County says that they have been under-delivered with vaccinations, whereas rural counties in the state of Maryland, like Kent County and Somerset County, have vaccinated higher percentages of their population relative to the amount of people they have living there. There's 1 million people in Montgomery County. There's 600,000 people, rough, give or take, in Baltimore City. How has the vaccination rollout gone there?
So Baltimore City's vaccination rollout has been significantly slower than the rest of the state, particularly for city school staff. So let's do a little comparison, right? Prince George's County, they are rolling up to have 1,200 vaccinations for school staff members per day, 1,200 per day. Baltimore City only started last week, and they're doing 500 per week, 500 per week versus 1,200 per day, right? And so that means even with staff who are willing to volunteer to go back into buildings, once they've been fully vaccinated, we are restricted by, the problems with the vaccination rollout and the speed at which it's happening in order to get people back into buildings, even for the folks who want to do that. And so, there's also clearly a lack of communication between the state and the district, as there was between the state and most districts, because they initially said, hey, educators, you're ready. You guys can start signing up. And people started signing up. And then we got different messaging from city schools saying, no, don't go through the state. We've got our own partnership that we just made with Johns Hopkins University, and we're going to go through them. So don't sign up through the state, but do sign up through us. And here's how you sign up through us. So now we already have this bifurcated system where some people are going through one place, some people are going through the other. We've heard early anecdotal reports from the people who've gotten their vaccinations from the state that it was actually a very smooth, quick, and easy process. The ones who've gone through Johns Hopkins University and the city schools partnership have had to wait multiple hours before they're able to complete that process. So it's been kind of a mess. And again, if we're actually committed to opening schools when it's safe and you want that to happen sooner, the governor and others could focus on getting more vaccines and increasing the speed of the rollout as fast as possible.
So I wanted to also ask Corey in terms of how are the students doing? Well, how are the students and the teachers doing? I can understand the arguments from some parents and others, mainly politicians, I suppose, who are insisting that these lockdowns have had a detrimental effect on kids, on their mental health, on their socialization, on their ability to learn effectively, which I don't think anybody disagrees with. But when people say we just should reopen schools, it's like the schools are closed for a reason. Y'all, they just didn't decide just to arbitrarily close schools and make you deal with your kids, all day, every day. So how are students and teachers faring in these lockdown learning times?
These are rough times. People's mental health have taken a hit, in part because we don't know whether we are going to be forced back into unsafe situations that will jeopardize our lives, the lives of our students, and the lives of their family members. That is a heavy burden to bear. And just because in the past, the United States has depended on public education to basically take care of kids so people can go work their jobs, does not mean that's the right system. Nor does it mean it is schools' fault when you have made schools be the place where kids are fed and are getting their mental health treatments and services and all the other things that all communities should have, but our country does not have. And because of that situation, the pandemic is exacerbating these already existing inequities. But the answer to that is not to then reopen schools to kill more people. That does not fix the mental trauma by having your grandparent die. And even if you put public health aside and it was just about learning, reopening schools right now is not going to look like pre-pandemic learning. What they are going to have to do is they will force people in, the students who have chosen in-person learning, and instead of having a teacher that is 100% focused on them, they're going to have teachers sitting in a classroom with students in front of them with their masks on, in different isolated bubbles, not being able to move. Meanwhile, the teacher will be in their own isolated bubble with their mask on, where you're not able to see their mouth moving. And then they're going to be live streaming to their virtual students simultaneously that they're responsible for. So now I'm teaching my virtual students and my in-person students at the same time, which means neither one is getting the same educational product. Now they're actually getting a worse version of both. Instead of me just focusing on virtual, investing in virtual to be better. Again, if your goal is just learning gaps, which is a problematic framing in the first place, if you put aside public health data, which is a terrible idea, it still won't achieve their stated ends because you're going back into a chaotic, not well-planned situation with people who cannot solely dedicate their attention to the students in front of them because we don't have the funding and staff to properly do that sort of hybrid model. How are students doing? It's also a struggle. A lot of older students are now working. A lot of students who are failing, it's not because they're not trying, it's because instead of going to classes, they're working during the day to support their family members. Meanwhile, there's an increased level of tragedy and death and sickness. And anytime you personally or your family is experiencing death and sickness, that has a lasting impact on your mental health. So people are upset, people are stressed, and all of that is exacerbated by the fact that we don't have a clear and safe plan for how to deal with this situation. And we hear new announcements every 2 weeks and reversals from our leaders and gray areas and incomplete, not comprehensive, nonsensical plans that aren't going to achieve their own stated ends. And that adds on top of the already existing trauma that folks have experienced during the pandemic, as opposed to let's finally take this opportunity to get ahead of this thing, get it be completely safe so that we can get back to the type of learning that y'all actually want in the first place. But you won't be able to do that if you reopen too early, unsafely, and then extend the pandemic as a result.
It seems as though if there is any sort of improvement in the pandemic numbers, if we experience a dip in infections or a dip in hospitalizations or ICU folks, all of a sudden the elected officials are like, look, see, it's getting better, time to reopen, without understanding that, these things ebb and flow. And while we may be experiencing a temporary dip, if we reopen things too soon, then that will hasten the spread once again. Corey, I want you to let's play fantasy if we could, right? Imagine we didn't live in this capitalist hellscape and there weren't idiots running this entire situation. What would have been the ideal situation, the ideal way for both students, parents, and teachers to cope with this pandemic and still get some learning in? What could have been done differently? And I know that's probably a very loaded question because there's probably 1,000 things that could have been done differently. But if there were teachers actually running this situation, How should this and how could this have gone I guess, minimize the stress and minimize the hardships on families and educators alike?
Yeah, this is a fun game to play. I wish this was the world we lived in, but it takes massive investments, resources that have to come from the federal level where they're able to print money as they please, like they do for Wall Street without blinking an eye. Those investments could have been put towards K through 12 education in a variety of ways. One, why is it that we have this thing called the internet and laptops and computers that people literally depend on to interact into this world, both socially and for their education? And yet in Baltimore City, over half the students do not have high-speed, high-quality internet, where we have a monopoly from Comcast that we can't get any sort of better deal. So if I need high-speed, high-quality internet to access the internet, right, to access my education, and I don't have that, we should be investing in public broadband at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, so we're not depending on for-profit corporations to decide whether or not a student in Baltimore City can access their constitutionally guaranteed right to an education. That is absurd, and that is something that is within the federal government's control to invest in and change very quickly. They haven't done that, right? Two, the vaccine rollout could have been a lot better, right? And if there had been a plan from the beginning where it said, listen, this is what the public health data says. This is when it will be safe. So we will not open until we have an extended period of time below those red lines, right? We'll establish them. Everybody knows what they are. And guess what? We're going to at least go through the spring all virtual. Said you don't know every week whether you're going to be mandated to go back into an unsafe school building for some students, but not others, in a weird half hybrid plan. Now, what you could do, again, is you say, listen, the students who have not been able to engage in school, who need extra supports, we can work harder to vaccinate educators as fast as possible. And then just using the educators who have been vaccinated, who have volunteered, you have made massive investments in infrastructure to complete all the ventilation work and the issues connected to that. You have put in work to ensure that we have the PPE and resources and sanitation materials and transportation so that students can get to and from school buildings safely. Then you could bring in very small groups, just with the staff who's been vaccinated and volunteered, right? And just with the students with special education needs, who are English language learners, who are currently failing their coursework and are in need of some more small group instruction and supports. And you could do a phased in rollout when it's safe, starting with very small groups of the neediest students, and build up as it becomes safe and more people, staff members are fully vaccinated and all the ventilation work has been completed. That would have been a thoughtful, reasonable plan where you wouldn't have had all these battles between the districts and the unions. And by the way, students would have gotten a better virtual learning experience if you made those investments in internet access and in virtual teaching and learning, which, right now we're using a lot of curriculum that we're basically beta testing on behalf of for-profit corporation, which frankly, their online tools have been crap, but we're paying them tons of money to experiment and beta test their new internet tools on our students. So all these investments could have made a tremendous difference for the quality of learning that students were having and our ability to start engaging in that learning in person a lot sooner.
Corey, last question I want to ask. I know you've been paying attention to what other teachers in school districts across the country are enduring. And yesterday, on Monday, the 25th, Chicago public schools were slated for a partial reopening of some in-person learning. But the Chicago Teachers Union and their members decided that teachers were not going to show up. This was a very powerful statement to the mayor of Chicago and to the Chicago public school system that teachers are afraid. They are not comfortable. They are not prepared. And clearly the city resources, similarly to Baltimore, the infrastructure there, Chicago public schools are dealing with a lot of the same things that Baltimore City public schools deal with as well, in addition to a slow vaccination rollout in Illinois where all public school teachers have not yet been vaccinated. If teachers in Baltimore City are mandated to show up to the classroom, and the conditions to do so, quote unquote, safely have not yet been met. What are the actions that the union is prepared to possibly take? I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but that big S word is looming, and a lot of people in the labor community are looking at teachers to see what teachers are going to do here. What are your thoughts about what the Chicago Teachers Union did and is doing? And are Baltimore City teachers, BTU members, prepared to do the same thing if put in a comparable situation?
Yeah, we look up to the Chicago's Teachers Union as just, the most badass union out there right now. They have organized the heck out of their members, out of their the students, their parents, community members, and they are jointly united. And so as a result, they have more power than the mayor on this, as they've demonstrated when they've gone on strike in the past. Baltimore City and Maryland have a slightly different situation that makes it more challenging for us to just say, well, we're going to go on strike in the same way that Chicago has done in the past. In Maryland, it's actually illegal to strike. And furthermore, it is in Baltimore City Public Schools contract with teachers and paraprofessionals saying it is illegal to strike. And furthermore, if it is determined that leadership has organized a strike, we can be decertified as a union, and a contract that folks have spent 30 years to build up could be erased in a second. Furthermore, right, if there's a dispute about, well, is this a strike or not? Well, that goes to the PSLRB, this Labor Relations Board. In Maryland, that is staffed by Hogan appointees, Republicans who are anti-union and would love the opportunity to destroy union power. So it's a different scenario when you compare Maryland to Illinois, where in Illinois, it is legal to strike. They don't face a PSLRB staffed by Republicans who are down to destroy unions. And so it's a much riskier proposition for our members to want to take that more dramatic action. And as a result, it doesn't feel like we have the level of support that you would need from membership to take that risk right now. Our folks are willing to consider all sorts of other actions. So, there have been hashtags on the internet. There have been plans for petitions. There have been rallies. There's a car caravan being planned right now. So there are other direct actions people are organizing and working towards right now in Baltimore City. But because of our less favorable circumstances with state law and the PSLRB, us striking could potentially mean the end of the Baltimore Teachers Union. And so folks are less willing to take that more dramatic step right now.
That is extremely chilling for teachers, educators, school staff. That's very disappointing, and I'm sorry to hear that Baltimore City teachers that contract in that language in those circumstances, if they wanted to strike, that it is illegal to do so. So I always say this: Maryland, not as progressive as advertised, right? Not at all. Corey, I appreciate you making some time. I know the meeting is tonight, so we will certainly be watching and paying attention and hoping that sensible, science-driven decisions are made to help keep students and teachers and faculty safe amidst the pandemic that is nowhere being under control yet. Guys, we've been speaking with Corey Gaber. He is the founding member of the Baltimore Movement of Rank and File Educators. He's also a VP on the Baltimore Teachers Union Executive Board. He's been joining us today. Corey, we appreciate your time, and more importantly, we appreciate your work. And thank you so much for all you do.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. Really appreciate it.
So guys, I want to thank Corey Gaber again. Corey wanted me to communicate to everybody that he is not the founding member of the Rank and File Educators organization. He is one of the founding members, and he also told me he is the only white man part of that organization. I'm not sure he was the only white man or he was the only white man founder. But Corey just wanted me to tell y'all that the white men were not firmly in charge of that particular group, that it is largely led by Black women. So thank you very much for Corey for extending some time for us and bringing us up to date on the situation where we are in Baltimore. But you guys are checking in. I was hanging out in the chat. Obviously, I had to leave because I had to come talk. But love to everybody. Black Magic, Microsoft Word technical support, Chelsea 100, Tony H. Who else are my people? Al Grasniak, can't forget about Al. Let me read some of these comments from the comments. Microsoft Word technical support says the other thing worth remembering is COVID has weird ass long-term effects. They're likely going to give those kids lifetime lung scarring and neurological damage. I saw a story, Lisa Snowden, friend of the show, y'all know who Lisa is. Lisa put up a story that this 36-year-old woman who was, I believe, she had a lot of kids. She was mother of 10, but regardless of how many kids she had a fucking stroke at 36 years old. She had COVID, she had a stroke, she died. 36, dying of a stroke. Y'all, we have no idea how long the repercussions and the lasting effects of COVID-19, how long they're going to be with us. My God. Anyway, back to the comments. Al Gresniak, what's up, Al? Al says Los Angeles intensive care units is still at 100% capacity. Do y'all follow me on Twitter? And this is not like y'all don't have to follow me on Twitter if you feel like it, whatever. My Twitter is @KimBrownLive. So I put up a tweet yesterday, day before, talking about basically the bipartisan effort of our elected leaders who are determined to serve capitalist interests at all costs. If it means reopening in the midst of a constantly accelerating and mutating virus, they don't care. So I said, basically, Gavin Newsom and Larry Hogan are both, birds of the same feather. Do you know how many dummies came in my mention talking about, LA, it's not that bad in California? It's not that bad in California. Are y'all fucking crazy? Like, people literally were arguing with me that 1 in 3 residents in Los Angeles County had contracted COVID since the beginning of the pandemic. Like, people were seriously trying to argue this point down to me. I'm like, and I had to tweet them links. Do you know how much I hate tweeting links to idiots who want to pop shit on Twitter? Because I don't feel like I have to justify my intellect to you, bitch. Google is fucking free. Like, if you don't believe me, go Google. It's not on me to prove to you that what I'm telling you is correct. You can just do your little Google searches and the information is right there waiting for you. But I guess that is too goddamn lazy for people on the internet. Here we go. H. Cortez 08. January 14th, 2021, Virginia released updated interim guidance for K-12 school reopening. What'd they say? H. Cortez, they going back to school? They ought not go back to school in Virginia. Virginia has worse numbers than Maryland. Virginia has worse numbers than the District of Columbia. Prince of Judah 79, also friend of the show. These people don't know what the hell they're doing. Prince of Judah 79. I'm going to have to push back on that just a tad because I had somebody give me a really interesting reply, right? You guys, so here in the United States, the way that the federal government handled the Indian problem, right? How they genocided Native Americans, removed them from their land, put them in, reform schools to try to rob them of their culture. Nazi Germany was emulating us. Like, Nazi Germany was the remix of American racism and genocide, right? So because in the United States, we don't send people to death camps. We're not exterminating people by the literal thousands in this day and time. Like, what we're witnessing right now, this is a sophisticated Holocaust, right? Like, they're using bioterrorism. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. I'm not saying that COVID was spread intentionally to Black and brown communities. Intentions be damned. The outcome is really what matters, right? I mean, you don't have to intend to kill thousands of people for thousands of people to die. And this is where we find ourselves at, y'all. I mean, they're talking about we could lose 500,000 by the end of February. Like, do you understand how big of a number that is? I know y'all understand it because y'all got good goddamn sense, but the rest of our countrymen, I don't know, Chief. These people don't seem to be fazed by 500,000 people dying. Derek Fuller from the comments says, a union that can't strike only in America. When Corey told me that, I mean, y'all heard it, like, Baltimore City Teachers Union can't, like, legally cannot strike. And if they do vote to strike, their contract is voided. I need more information, honey, because that don't sound good at all. So guys, let's call it a day, shall we? Join us back here Friday for Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Oh, quick little programming note. supposedly, I'm going to be on Clickbaity tonight with Ben Dixon, Marcus, and Mondale. Are y'all happy? Somebody had put in the comments a while ago that, why don't you go be on Clickbaity with them? I had been on Clickbaity with them a couple times, but they just invited me back. So tonight, 8:30 in the place to be. Tune into Clickbaity, the political thirst trap. I will be hanging out with Ben, Marcus, and Mondale, so be sure to check that out. Also, don't forget, if you want to support the show, you can easily do so at patreon.com/BIDWKB. And we have a cash app, $BIDWKB. Listen, I appreciate anything that you're able to send. And if you're not able to send anything, that's fine too. Just tune in. Give us a like. Give us a subscription. And, tell a friend to tell a friend. Yes, you know what I'm saying? Spread the word. We appreciate the love. I mean, we appreciate money too, but we most importantly appreciate the love. So thank you all so much for your continued support. I keep seeing the same names and faces, and y'all know I appreciate it ever since the stir crazy days. But we're going all the way to the top, baby. We might be little today, but we're going to be big one day. So thank you again for hanging out with me. Tune in to Burn It Down with Kim Brown on Friday. Y'all have a good rest of your Tuesday evening, y'all. See y'all later.